Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the amazing Garrett Sawaia. Did I say that right?
You did, man. I like that. Not many people do. It was a rough time going through school with that last name. So yeah, Sawaia, that is it, man. I
I
appreciate that.
appreciate it, man. Man, and I'm so excited to make this happen. We kind of made this happen because we both have good friends that are good friends, and to be able to make that connection through that has been super rad. So, I want to talk a little bit about you before we get into the reason why we're here. Garrett is a husband and father from Little Old Rhode Island, as well as a full-time fitness trainer and online fitness coach. As a lifelong movie lover and physical media collector, he created the Born2BeRad brand and channel for YouTube about 15 months ago. Now, on his channel, it's not just horror. It's movies, horror, physical media, and all things nostalgia based. So, first off, let's talk about the fitness coaching and the fitness training. What inspired you to want to do that?
Well, I've been doing it for about 17 years now. Growing up, I actually was very athletic, but when it came time for puberty to hit or whatever, I was the one that was a very late bloomer. So when I was in high school, I was still playing soccer at the time. The other sports like basketball and baseball, I was too small to play at that point. So soccer was like the only thing I had left. And junior year, I got cut. And it was mainly just because not my skills, but at that point I was still just too little. I was scrawny and I just couldn't keep up with like the kids in my high school anymore. So I ended up getting cut. And from, then on out, sports were done for me. And I really didn't know what my next move was. And my uncle came to me, who was, he was a bodybuilder back in the 80s. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to start working out?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And man, that kind of changed everything for me. It really just created this new confidence. Like I hit a growth spurt right around the same time. So everything kind of came together at the right times. And I started making a lot of physical changes, which then really caused a lot of mental changes. And
Sure.
I think it was just kind of like right place, right time. Man, if that never happened, I'm not sure exactly where I'd be, because I went to college for a couple different things, really didn't want to do a desk job. And, I love the working out thing. So I was like, all right, let me try this as a career. Went to school, got certified in that. And man, I've been doing it ever since. And it was just something that really just, I'm not going to say came easy to me, but I was put in situations where I feel like I really excelled. And, I remember being a senior in high school and they wanted to know what I wanted to do for a living. And I told them I was going to be a WWE wrestler. At the time, WWF wrestler. That was my goal. And I was like, listen, I'm going to Killer Kowalski's school. That's going to be my college. At that point, I had probably been working out probably a little under a year. So like my confidence level was like huge based on the changes that I saw in myself. So, then that became, let us call your parents kind of discussion with the guidance counselor and my parents basically being like, "Oh yeah, he was one of the smallest kids in school and now he wants to wrestle." Now, this is like attitude era. So,
Right.
I mean, I really had no business being in there with guys like Triple H. Like, even though I was getting in better shape, I mean, I was no, professional wrestler at the time. So that kind of took a back seat and the fitness thing took over. And man, that's just kind of how everything started for me. And, going into the fitness thing and being able to use my personality and almost using the fitness space as like my arena, right? And I was still that wrestler at heart, and I could really just put on a show and stuff. And it's just really worked. And I've gone in a bunch of different directions with it, like as far as doing it online now, doing it in person, doing groups. And yeah, man, it just kind of all came together. And I think I'm a big advocate for like everything happens for a reason. So
Yeah.
if who knows what happened if my guidance counselor didn't tell me no. I don't know.
Dude, and this is a total true story. In fourth grade, for my birthday, my buddy Billy cut out a picture of my face and put it over top of Shawn Michaels doing the split leg thing on a birthday card, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to be a WWF wrestler back then, man. Like that was my goal too. But much like you, I was a scrawny little shit. Like I was tiny, but that did not deter me at all. I never got into bodybuilding because I'm way too lazy. But man, like exercise and fitness, the older I get now, I'm starting to get more, physically in shape because I need to. I have kids I got to, think about, not just myself. But it's amazing when I hear these stories and I hear you talk about WWF wrestling. Like it transports me back to doing an elbow drop off of a ladder onto a trampoline and then doing the kick up like Shawn Michaels and getting ready for my super kick. Like, I get it, man. Like, we live the same, even though we're that far apart. So
Right.
it's amazing to see all these things that mean so much to you and growing up and being a fitness coach, but to also Born2BeRad, which is how we really connected. Justin, Ryan 1988, one of my best friends who I love with all my heart. He introduced me to your channel. And I knew watching your retrospective, I wanted you to be a part of this. What made you, I know what got you to start the fitness coaching, but what gave you the push to really, start the Born2BeRad brand?
Yeah, man. It's funny that you bring up the wrestling thing. Like, dude, we could sit here for hours and go back and talk about, our time with growing up wrestling in the living room. Man, I have tapes of me in a trampoline federation and a backyard federation on VHS here. So I think we're, like you said, like we live so far apart, but we're very much in the same, right? And that's kind of what I've learned being in this community on YouTube, is that there's a lot of me, around there, where I think, like, when I look at myself and, you're in your hometown and you're thinking like, man, I'm very different than a lot of people in the way I think and stuff. But then when you put yourself out there and you find all these like-minded people, it's just insane to see like how many similar people are out there that kind of grew up the same way, think the same way. And when it came to the channel, I've been an avid collector of things, of movies, of physical media, posters, anything movie related, mostly horror, but a lot of stuff that I grew up with. Like, my favorite movie of all time is probably Back to the Future. Like, I'm a little bit out there, right? Like, about what are you going to tell me? Yours is too?
Swear to God, dude.
Oh,
Everybody that knows me knows this is hilarious. My favorite, I think the perfect movie is Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I think that's the only perfect movie ever made. But my all-time favorite movie is Back to the Future. Like, that's so funny, dude. Like,
it's crazy, right?
And Robert Gifford, a kid I grew up with, in his basement when we were kids, we had, from the time we were like 14 to 19, we did AWR, which was the Aggie Wrestling Room, down in his basement. Like, we had a wall that his parents were going to tear down. So in one of our episodes, like, we threw two people into the wall and the whole wall fell down. Like, the whole basement full of kids was like, holy shit. Like,
oh yeah.
And we're all just sitting there like, oh my God, it actually worked. That fucking wall fell. Like, oh my
Dude,
God, this is intense.
What a time to be alive, though, because again, like, we were all doing that. I had a basement league in my house, WAW, World's Awesomest Wrestling. We had like all the pillows and the couch cushions from down the basement on the floor. We all had characters, and then it went into the trampoline stuff, and we continued it there. And then, I actually, once I became a full-time coach, I had money. Like, I did go to wrestling school for a short time, and I actually wrestled in the indies for about a year and a half on my own dime, after being trained a little bit. And, that kind of got cut short with, real life stuff. I got married, bought my first place, opened a gym. So like all those things kind of got put on hold. And I said, yeah, I'll go back. And sadly, that was going on probably 13 years ago. And I've never stepped foot in again. And, it's one of those things I could go back and be like, man, I wish I would have jumped back in. But like I said, things happen for a reason. I'm doing this now. Who knows what would have been going on if I would have stuck around there. I mean, I could be in a wheelchair for all I know. Who knows, right? But yeah, man, it's crazy that you said like your favorite movie is Back to the Future. But yeah, so just being a huge collector like my whole life and just loving movies so much, I was watching YouTube, back as like I'm gonna say probably in my early 20s. I was still living at home. I was in college. I was really heavy into DVD like collecting. So I was using YouTube as a source to like find movies out that I may have never seen. And, my uncle's another guy, like the guy who got me into fitness. He got me into horror. Like he was showing me horror movies when I was a little kid, or at least trying to. And, he got me into collecting movies and stuff like that. And, watching people online, like including Justin Ryan, was somebody that I watched way back in the day. And he's so much younger than I am. So it's funny to see how young he was when he started. Justin was one. Wet Movie was another one at the time. Like Cool Duder was one I was watching on a regular back then. I was heavy into Dead Pit, which is another big thing because, I'm doing a lot of stuff with them now. And they were one of my influences, that I was getting advice from as far as what movies were good, what weren't good, what to check out. And, that kind of turned into me just collecting and watching. And then I started talking to Wes from Dead Pit, fitness related once. And, I reached out to him and said, hey, a big fan of the show, blah, blah, blah. I know fitness, you were talking about getting in better shape, for your health. And I'm a full-time coach. If you need any advice, let me know. And he reached back out and said, yeah, man, I would love some. And, I ended up helping him lose about 100 pounds just online. And we kind of became friends after that. And he started like a wrestling show when Dead Pit was kind of on the outs for a little while. And it was like me, him, my friend Freddie, this guy Corey, this guy Jason who has YouTube, and Piz Owl, who you might know from YouTube as well. And we did like a small wrestling show called WrestleManiacs for about a year. And that was like my first introduction to like being on camera, doing YouTube stuff. And then that kind of went to the wayside, and that was it for me. YouTube was over. Well, we're going to fast forward a couple of years, and, people like Piz Owl and Wes from Dead Pit, I stayed really good friends with. And they kind of were always like, after the show ended with WrestleManiacs, they were like, man, like, you got a great collection, like, your stuff, like, why don't you start a channel or whatever? And I'm like, I'm so busy, I don't have time, blah, blah. Well, when the pandemic hit, man, like, I had a lot of time. And for work, I was doing a lot of online coaching. So I bought like lights and cameras and all this stuff to do my work with. So that I was kind of like, you know what, like, I've got time, I've got equipment. Let's see what I can do with this thing. And that's really where it all started. And again, like I said, everything happens for a reason. As bad as COVID was for a lot of people, and the pandemic was bad in a lot of ways. If we didn't have that, I don't think I would have this channel at all.
I wouldn't have this one.
Oh, did you start then too? Around that time?
I absolutely did.
All right. So it's just crazy. So like, I'm sure you probably said it 100 times in the show, but like, what was kind of your story in that sense? Very similar to mine in a way, or?
Well, I mean, I was laid off and annoying the fuck out of my wife. And I don't know if you know or not, but I grew up in a video store. My parents owned a video store. So movies is something that I've always been in love with. And my first horror movie was a party favor. When we'd have parties and shit, we'd be drinking and talking about it. And when the pandemic hit, my wife was like, you should try to get people on to talk about this. And it just snowballed from there, and now we're doing lives. Like, it's funny, we just did a live 2 weeks ago, counting down. My very first non-horror related live was counting down our top 10 favorite professional wrestlers of all time. So it totally was.
Oh, yours too?
Oh, for sure. Shawn Michaels.
My Shawn Michaels, no doubt. Yeah.
Oh, that was my number one. You can go back and watch the episode if you don't believe
that
me.
Is so funny. Like, yeah.
For sure, dude. Yeah, absolutely. So another thing I want to say to you guys, you're listening to him. He's the shit. And if you want to follow him and stay in close contact with him, all his social media links are down here in the description. So make sure you're following him on social media. Make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube. Make sure you're doing everything you possibly can to stay in touch with this guy. If you want some online fitness coaching, this is the guy to talk to. Me and him are going to talk about that later on too, because daddy still got to lose some weight. So that's what my kids tell me. Garrett, in order to, be a horror collector, as you guys all see there in the background. I love the Child's Play dolls, by the way. That Child's Play is my favorite horror franchise of all time. And don't think that I don't notice there in the background, right over there.
What do you say?
We got the hoverboard back there.
Oh baby, we do. We've got so I don't know if you can see it over my shoulder, but so we've got the hoverboard, but I also have got Marty's skateboard from part 1. Right there, the Madrid. Yes. And then over in the corner in that glass case of the Nike mags.
See, I could barely see those. Is that the hat?
I should have turned. So I got the My Pet Monster with the 2015 Back to the Future hat on, and then underneath him, he's sitting on top of a glass case which has those Nike mags in it. Which I probably should have lit them up or whatever. But yeah, you might not be able to see them.
I mean, you didn't think I'd be that much into the Back to the Future, probably, but
no,
I still to this day I think that when you talk about a movie that has everything to it, to me, that's Back to the Future. Back to the Future 2, I think is great. I think it's a great film. Back to the Future 3 exists, but the first Back to the Future to me is it's amazing. It is an amazing movie. I could watch it 100 times in a row and never get bored with it. So
yeah, I agree. And I think part 2, I like too a lot because, at the time, like all the futuristic stuff was so wild to me that it was just mind blowing. And I can remember seeing it in the theaters in Florida when I was visiting my grandmother, and like we went to Pizza Hut before, got those solar shades. My brother and I are wearing them to the theater, and it was like a huge to do at the time when that movie came out. And fell so much in love with that movie, then went back to Florida a couple years later. Maybe it was even around the same time. We went on the ride at Universal that they had at the time. And man, it's just a great movie. And the first one, again, we talk about perfect movies, and I'm going to say that to me, it is one. And I don't think that could ever be replicated the same way, even if we try to modernize it and do the same thing. It's just got this specific like feeling that I don't think can ever be replicated no matter how hard we try. And going into what we're going to talk about tonight, I kind of feel the same way about this movie when it comes to the horror genre. Like, I'm not going to look at this as a straight scary horror movie, but there's a lot to this movie that I feel personally is almost a near perfect horror movie in what I look for, I think, in horror movies.
Well, I'll be goddamned if that's not the perfect segue, man. So we know what you got going on right now, my friend, but let's go back to the past and let's talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Garrett, your first horror movie was?
It's gonna be Fright Night, for real.
I got it here on this 4 DVD set with one of my favorite remakes of all time, The Blob. We got Christine on here, The Seventh Sign, super underrated horror movie. Man, Fright Night. I think this is the first time I've ever talked about this on the show. We're at episode almost 290, and it's the first time I can remember talking about it. Do you remember which scene it was that affected you the most from Fright Night?
Fright Night was very interesting to me. Like I said, I grew up, my uncle was trying to get me in a horror movie. So I remember like snippets of things. Like he put on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I can remember the beginning when like Franklin was trying to whiz in the side of the road and he fell down. And then as soon as Hitchhiker hit that van, he shut it right off. I can remember that. So, it was just a snippet. I remember snippets of Friday 13 Part 3 because he was trying to show me how cool the 3D was in that movie back in the day and explaining to me like, oh, you see how the yo-yo's doing this? That's because in the theater it looked so good. And, he was showing me bits and pieces of it. And, I even think as a kid, I believe my parents rented Jaws 2. So that may have kind of been something I had seen before this, but not enough that it really hit me the way this did. And what introduced me to this is not necessarily a scene, but my uncle for like my birthday or whatever gave me a box and said, hey, it's the full collection of this. Check it out. I was really big into baseball cards as a kid, very big into sports cards. And so in that same vein, he got me these cards called Fright Flicks, which were, I don't remember exactly what year these came out. Maybe they have it on here. But 1985, well, maybe that's the name of the movie. But anyway, these Fright Flicks cards were basically like horror movie cards with like these weird, funny slogans at the bottom. So I don't know if they were trying to take on like maybe Garbage Pail Kids or like Wax Packs or something. But the images that stood out to me were these three right here. And I can show really quick if you can see.
Yeah.
So there's Evil Ed, right? Then there is, you got Amy here with the transformation scene. And then you have Jerry here with his transformation scene. And what was interesting about these is just the things that said underneath. Like when it showed Amy with this big mouth.
Soup is hot.
Yeah, it says that soup is hot. Evil Ed says, I got to stop hammering nails in my head. Dandridge says, what do you mean? I just had a manicure and he's got those big nails. So as a young kid, I looked at those and I was completely in awe with just the effects and what they looked like. It freaked me out. And then when I'm looking underneath and like reading these things, to me as a kid, I thought these were like what they were really saying in the movie. Like these things, like I thought this girl just ate a thing of soup and now that's what her face looks like. Like that's really what I thought. And when you turn it around, you see that it says movie Fright Night. So I was always really intrigued by that. And I think it was like one Saturday afternoon, I think Wrestling Superstars was on at the time. And this was probably maybe like 1990, I'm going to say. And I think it said like coming up next, a double feature of Fright Night and Fright Night 2. And I was like, whoa, there's that movie. And this was like a Saturday afternoon I watched for the first time. I actually watched them back to back, 1 and 2. And I can remember just, waiting for those scenes that I saw in these cards so many years ago. And I'm going to say I think just the transformation stuff. So when we first saw Jerry transform like that, when he was in Charlie's bedroom and he hit him with the pencil through the hand, like that one, I was like, whoa, like that, that's him. And then, by the time we got to Evil Ed and I saw that happen, he got burned with the cross and it was like, oh my God, that's that picture. And then Amy at the end, which was the big one where she made that big transformation and kind of turned her head and her mouth was really big. Nothing at that point that I lost sleep over, but it was just something that I was kind of finally putting the puzzle pieces together into what I kind of imagined in my head for all those years, except, now I'm like, what about My Soup is Hot? Like I thought, and not realizing that these were just shit that they made up for the cards, to later down the road. So it just had a big effect on me because it was always like that lost movie that I had seen on these cards years and years before. So
those liars, that scary bitch wasn't eating any soup.
You're right. And I mean, who knows? I mean, I saw it on TV in 1990. It could have been edited for all I knew. Like it could have been shortened, so maybe it wasn't as effective. I don't remember, but yeah, that was the big one for me. And I just fell in love with those two movies so much that I had to go out as soon as I had money and find the VHS tape. So
yes,
this is the VHS tape that I had as a kid, and it's in pristine condition. It's actually even got like that, those ones that was sealed on everything. Yeah. So I just completely fell in love with that movie. And then in the late 90s, I think it might have been for a graduation or something, but Fright Night was the first DVD I ever bought. And this is the first DVD I ever owned. The day I bought my player was Fright Night. And I think Exorcist was like shortly after, but yeah, so it just has always stuck with me through the years. And it all started with those cards, man.
And it's funny because you talked earlier about how this is not just a horror movie. I think it definitely has the sprinkle of comedy that works. Like you have this line right here from Evil Ed.
Oh, you're so cool, Brewster.
Or this line from Evil Ed.
His dinner's in the oven.
I can't tell you how many times I quoted those as a kid, whether it was, "You're so cool, Brewster," or, "Ooh, dinner's in the oven." Those things like evil. You talk about movies that have a perfect casting. Mm-hmm. And I think that this casting of Evil Ed is just phenomenal. Like he nails it. I mean, you feel pity for him when Dandridge reaches his hand out and Evil takes his hand and just gives himself to Dandridge, or at the end, towards the end of the film, when he's fighting Peter Vincent and he stabs him and throws him over the balcony when he's trying to defend himself, and he turns from the wolf back into himself and he's dying, and you still feel that sympathy for him. Like Ed is a character you really sympathize with, even when he's evil.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as a young kid, I was heavily into like the Coreys and all that stuff back then, and Goonies and License to Drive and all those movies. And to me, Evil Ed was a type of character. When I saw him for the first time, I thought to myself, wow, like he felt just as big of a star as those other child actors did at the time. And I can remember really looking around and be like, we didn't have an internet at the time, obviously. So it was one of those things like, where else can I see this guy? Because everywhere you turned, you saw Corey Feldman, and right. Corey Haim was not too far behind and stuff like that. And I was like, man, like I've never seen this guy in anything else. And, come to find out his career wasn't that large when it came to movies. Like he had 976 Evil. He had another great one, which is Fraternity Vacation, which is more of a comedy, but he plays the lead and he still does a hell of a job. And you just kind of wonder why he never was, in those type of movies, like a Goonies type all kid cast, because I felt like he, like you said, like he was a standout in this, no doubt. And Chris Sarandon is great in everything. So, I mean, he was another standout to me, is those two. And I actually felt the same way about Charlie. Like Charlie to me was somebody that I thought I was going to see in a lot more stuff, as I started picking through, more movies and stuff like that. And same thing, like he was in a couple, but nothing that you would have thought as a lead in such a great movie that he would have done a lot more.
Yeah. And it's funny because we were just talking about perfectly cast. Sarandon kills it in everything, and it's funny because now I watch this and I look at Amy and I'm like, Married with Children, but like,
yeah,
I love the casting in this whole movie. I think it's all great. And we know which scene it was, Garrett, that affected you the most. It was really a trilogy of scenes there because of the cards. But what would you say your favorite scene from Fright Night would be?
Man, I'm going to try to think here. So my favorite overall scene, I mean, I love that sequence in the nightclub with him and Amy dancing and the killer music going on and her starting to fall for him and just seeing what a great head vampire he is. Like, I mean, if you had a movie Dracula and Chris Sarandon was Dracula, like it's so believable because he's a good looking dude, and it just worked. Like it made sense, except, when you look back now and you're kind of like, well, wait a minute. Amy was in high school. This guy's like a grown man, right? So you look back at it now and you're like, man, things were different back then.
What about like I've always, even as a kid, I was like, wow, that looks great. Not understanding cinematography, but when she's dancing with him, but looking in the mirror
He's
and
not
only
there.
seeing herself, you know, like even as a little boy, I was like, wow, that looks awesome. Like, how do they
Yeah.
do that? You know,
Right. I
but
mean,
I have to agree with you. I think that's one of the best scenes in the whole film.
and like you said, I mean, you're a huge fan of Child's Play. Same with me. And man, Tom Holland like kills it, dude. Like he's another one that just he just knows either how to direct or write or whatever. But like I love like all his stuff, and I think it just really shows here the same way Child's Play does as well.
Yep. And another question I've been asking recently, Garrett, is we talk about obviously in Hollywood now, remakes are all the rage. Remakes, requels, whatever you want. Sequels, remakes, requels, they're all the rage. Fright Night had a remake. Did you see the Fright Night remake, and what were your opinions on it?
I saw it opening night. I was actually in New Jersey at a Monster Mania horror convention the night it came out, and I met Chris Sarandon for the first time that night. So I brought up my poster. Chris Sarandon signed it, and I said, "Hey, man, I'm going to see the new Fright Night tonight. Is there anything you can say about it?" And he just kind of like looked at me and like winked and like smirked, and that was it. And then when I went to see it in the theater, and all of a sudden saw he had like a small cameo, I was like, "Oh, maybe that's what he was trying to say," And you know, it's been a while since I've watched it. I remember it was one of those ones when I first saw it, I didn't like it. But I'm the type of person where I feel like I have to sometimes rewatch things a bunch of
Yeah.
times to appreciate them. And I'm really, at first glance, a lot of the times I'm not into something. So with this, I'm going to say I didn't care for it that much, but I'm also going to say I think it's one that I might have to go back and give another chance. I was happy to see him in it. I was happy to see Sarandon in it, even for a small part. I think like things like Evil Ed will never be replicated. Peter Vincent will never be replicated. So, those two characters alone to me didn't work. I don't remember much about how good or bad Farrell was. I do think there was a kind of a pretty cool scene where was he trying to get in the house and like was kind of being weird about I forget. But and I thought the kid who played Charlie was all right. I thought he was pretty good.
I feel like it's forgettable, and if you're gonna
definitely
remake a movie like Fright Night, it should not be forgettable.
Agree. I mean, I think that there's other movies out there that I could have said, hey, if you did X, Y, and Z, this would have been a way better Fright Night remake than the Fright Night remake. I don't know if you've seen Summer of 1984 or Summer of 84. It was a movie that came out a couple. So to me, that's like, man, if you just take I'm a killer into I'm a vampire, like that could have worked because it just had that same setting. And I think a reason I really like both movies, especially Fright Night, I gravitated towards is that was how I grew up. I grew up in a neighborhood in a suburb. Everybody knew everybody. It was a large neighborhood. You had kids running around, your neighbors. There was always a couple neighbors in the street that like no one ever saw. It just is very relatable to me. And that's, things like The Burbs and Fright Night and Disturbia and this Summer of 84. Like these movies really do it for me. The Fright Night remake, Monster Squad is another one. Fright Night remake didn't feel that way because they were in some kind of like weird compound that was not really, it didn't really have that suburbia feel to me. And I think that hurt it as well.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I've only seen it the one time. I do have to rewatch it. We're doing an episode of Versus on that soon. So maybe my opinion will change, but my initial opinion was I don't ever have to see this movie again. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It was just a movie to me. And that's not what I was looking for with a Fright Night remake. So, man, Garrett, we know what Fright Night meant to you being your first horror movie, but now I want to kind of throw you a little bit of a curveball here. My little buddy Ghostface has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Garrett? What is your favorite horror movie?
It's tough. I get asked this a lot. And you know what? Like Fright Night really is right there. And I think it really boils down to to me, I'm going to say it's probably Lost Boys. And do I think that's the best horror movie? No, but it's one that I just feel like I can relate with so much. And it's just such a fun movie to me. And, Fright Night and that, or sometimes I'll go back and forth because I think Fright Night's a better movie. Mm-hmm. But I think everything Lost Boys is kind of more me. Like, I don't know. It's just they're very neck and neck. I'm gonna have to probably say Lost Boys at the end of the day, but Fright Night is right there. And it's just got that vibe of like, man, this was the 80s, and you know, we're gonna add horror to it, and there's a little bit of comedic elements, and it's just really what I look for in horror movies. They're not the scariest, don't get me wrong. I think Fright Night's a scarier movie than Lost Boys. But they're just entertaining and fun, and I could watch those two movies like every single day and not get bored.
Well, where I agree with what you're saying here, I think there's a total difference between what we think is our favorite horror movie and what the best horror movie is. Because my favorite horror movie will always be House from 1986. That was my first. That is my favorite. I can name 10 horror movies off the top of my head right now that are better than that, but there will never be another favorite to me. Now, man, I've had an amazing time talking pro wrestling, talking fitness, talking horror with you. But I have one last question for you before I let you go. We're going to bounce back to Fright Night. And what we're going to do now is we are going to rank this on a skull count. Now, what we're doing, we're not being critics. We're not going to judge this on score, acting, direction, none of the above. What we're going to do is rank this strictly on how much it affected you on first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. With that ranking, what would your ranking of Fright Night be?
What did you say the top one was? 5?
5.
I'm going to say 5 because I think that this was just the perfect, like I said, I grew up in that situation in a suburban type neighborhood. And I think it was the perfect gateway movie that I could have seen at the right time. Because, you know, I was dabbling in things like Are You Afraid of the Dark, X-Files, things like that. And again, maybe I saw this before that. I don't know exactly with the years, probably around the same time, but you know, there was always little elements of horror that kind of were creeping into my life. And it could have even just been, you know, something that was very kid friendly, but I really liked it. For instance, man, Bunnicula. I don't know if you ever heard of that book. It was like a vampire bunny book that I used to read when I was in, you know, elementary school from the public library. And it was about like a vampire bunny. Like, I don't know what drew me to that, but something did. There was another movie called like, something Mrs. Something is Missing. And it was like, this teacher Viola Swamp was like this witch teacher that like, you know, I was into that. I don't know why, but I think there was always horror elements that intrigued me. And it could have been my uncle really trying to push the button at a very young age for me. But I think Fright Night was just the perfect movie to really gateway me into being like, you know what? Like, I need to know more about this horror stuff. And that's
I love your uncle already, man.
he's been a big influence on me for sure.
So we are at the end of the third act, guys. The credits are about to roll. The curtain's about to drop. Before it does, there are some social media links right down here. I'm looking at them right now. They need a click in. So make sure you're following Garrett, Born2BeRad, on social media. Make sure that you're following everything he does. Make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube. Don't go anywhere, Garrett. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror. Stay what you are. And we'll see you guys soon.